Hello there, everybody. I'm Jeff Mayers from WisPolitics.com and State Affairs, and we're here on Wednesday, January 28th for a event, data legislation at the Capitol, prospects and impacts. So we have a lot of people who are involved in getting this together. Want to make sure I thank them appropriately. WisPolitics.com, State Affairs, uh, State Affairs. We're part of the State Affairs Network. We're a nonpartisan news organization based in Madison. You can find us at WisPolitics.com and StateAffairs.com. WisBusiness.com is a sister publication of ours, and you can find the reporting there at WisBusiness.com. This We partnered with the Wisconsin Technology Council, another nonpartisan organization. It's one of four events we're doing this year with the Wisconsin Technology Council. We've often done events with the Tech Council. And in fact, there is a joint event we're doing next week on this topic with a top Microsoft executive. And you can find out the information on that February 5th in-person event at wispolitics.com. Go to the right-hand column and scroll down. So this event is part of a series we do in Madison at the Madison Club. We have a whole series of events coming up, but this first one we're doing is virtual because of the high interest in this topic. So our sponsors for this event series are HBS, Xcel Energy, American Family Insurance, the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance, the Wisconsin Hospital Association, Walmart, and the WEC Energy Group. So let me just talk a little bit about this topic before we jump into it. Data centers are very controversial, very much in the news. In fact, headlines today out of Mount Pleasant, the Mount Pleasant Village Board okayed an expansion of the Microsoft data center site plans there. The DeForest Village, which is north of Madison, though, the village staff there says a data center is not feasible, and the expectation is the QTS will withdraw its proposal there. Research shows that construction is underway, many proposals, but construction is underway in Beaver Dam, Mount Pleasant, and Port Washington on these huge data centers. So why are we talking about this today? Well, the Assembly Republicans recently passed a bill, AB 840, and sent it to the Senate. And now Governor Evers has indicated that that's a likely veto, and we'll talk a little bit more with our Democratic state representative. But the aim of this legislation, as Republicans say, is to prevent data centers from passing on their energy costs and to make sure that renewable energy use at those data centers is on the property of the data center, which is a sticking point, as you'll see. We did invite the Republican sponsors in the Senate and the Assembly to join us, but they had conflicts, and so we filled out the panel as we did. Now, we're not going to answer all the questions. We're not going to be able to get every single perspective here today. We only have an hour. This will be one of many conversations. As I said, we have an event next week with the Tech Council in Madison on this. We'll have many conversations on this topic. I'll be asking questions of our panel, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions through the Zoom chat, and I'll relay those, not all of them probably, but I'll relay those to the participants here today, the panelists. And please be respectful in your questions. So let me now introduce the panel. So we have Representative Stroud, a Democrat from Ashland. Thank you very much for coming today. We have Tricia Braun. She's the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Data Center Coalition. We have the Port Washington Mayor, Ted Neitzke, and we have Jason Stein from the Wisconsin Policy Forum. Welcome all. Thanks very much. So before I get into deep questions, I want to go to you, Jason, to talk about the report that the Wisconsin Policy Forum did on this topic. It's I think it helps set the stage for the breadth of the data center development in the state. So can you just tell us a little bit about the report, how to find it, and some of your findings, and then we can get into the questions.
Absolutely. So thanks, Jeff, for having me, and thanks to the other panelists. I we have that brief up on our website at wispolicyforum.org, and people can check it out there for free. The Wisconsin Policy Forum doesn't advocate on these issues, and we just try and educate people about them. Essentially, what we found is, you know, we looked at the power and water usage of data centers around our state. The power usage is it's a legitimate and major issue that will need to be dealt with for data centers to move forward effectively along with the rest of our residential and business customers in the state. We found that on the power side, a major data center could use maybe roughly 1.5% of the power that's currently sold in the state. And so it's a significant thing. Federally, if you look at data from the federal government, nationally, about 4% of all electricity consumed in the United States is consumed by data centers, and that might rise to 7 to 12% by 2028. Now, and we'd also see an increase in Wisconsin. The context in Wisconsin is of falling power and water usage up until now. So if you look over the past 20 years, electricity sales in Wisconsin in megawatt hours have fallen by 9%, led by a drop in industrial users. The peak demand has gone from 15 gigawatts in 2006 to 14.6 gigawatts. And you've seen the revenue from these sales drop by 15% since 2011. So, that's not an ideal situation to be trying to sustain your power grid with falling sales. Now, we are expecting sales to rise because the data centers to 17 gigawatts or peak demand to go to 17 gigawatts over the next 5 years. That's according to what has been reported by utilities to the PSC. And so then I'll just talk about water and then I'll hand it over to another panelist. But on the water side, our utilities, our municipal water utilities in the state sell about 138 billion gallons of water a year. And to put that in context, in the late 90s, we were selling about 38 billion more than that. Or excuse me, about 30 billion gallons more than that. So we've had a drop of about 18% over 25 years. And in particular, a big drop in industrial water use as you've had, industry leave the state or become more efficient, residential customers become more efficient. So, on the water side, there's been concerns about the demand from data centers, but I think people do need to understand how much more water was once being used within our system. I'll just give you one final example. In Mount Pleasant, where you have the Microsoft data center, there's been some discussion that might use in the 8 million gallons a year range and the millions of gallons per year. The Racine Waterworks 25 years ago was using or was selling about 2 billion gallons of water more a year than it is now. So, sort of hundreds of times more than what the current expectation of demand is from a data center. So, I think that's also helpful context for people to sort of evaluate these claims and these concerns that are being raised.
Mhm.
Okay, so Jason, you had some recommendations at the end of your report, but let me just ask this question. I mean, given what's going on, the scale of these data centers do you think state regulation is needed? Because the state PSC does not per se regulate data centers.
I mean, they just regulate the utilities market. They regulate both municipal water and both municipal and for-profit uh, electric utilities. So clearly, PSC regulation is going to occur here, and the forum doesn't advocate for or against. We just provide policy options, but clearly this is going to fall into an existing regulatory framework. we certainly hope to see information on power and water usage of data centers tracked at a statewide level. That's always helpful for us in our work. We'd like, I think there's a number of concerns and they'll come up on the power side about how you um, minimize impacts to other ratepayers of these data centers, or the possibility that you might have transmission or generation capacity that's built to serve them. And then for whatever reason, those data centers don't fully use that demand or are not fully able to sort of amortize, if you will, the costs of those investments. And I think, utilities like We Energies have put forward proposals to sort of address those concerns. And I think it'll be part of the rate cases and just the larger debate about whether the proposals that have been put forward adequately address those concerns or whether there's, further things that need to happen.
Okay, let's go to Representative Angela Stroud, and she's a Democrat from Ashland. Thanks very much for joining us today, Representative. Tell us why you have a competing bill to the one that passed the Assembly. Tell us about your legislation and why you introduced that.
Sure. Well, I was lucky to be joined with Senator Jody Habesh-Sinekin, whose office really gets a ton of credit for the behind-the-scenes work on putting that bill together. Our main goal is protecting the public, and protecting ratepayers is actually complicated. And as was just suggested by Jason, there's a lot of vulnerabilities here, and they exist insofar as the way that our utilities law operates is that costs are spread out across customer classes. And so we don't have data center law currently, or we're not actually targeting it to data centers, we're targeting it to very large customer class. That doesn't currently exist. But by having different customer classes, we could partition off data centers into their own customer class, which would mean that the PSC would actually have a legal mechanism to try to contain costs and keep it from bleeding over into not only residential, which the public at large is really concerned about, but the other customer classes we have in current law are industrial and commercial. And so if we don't have a way to contain customer or costs through the PSC regulatory system, it's going to be spread out across all commercial or all industrial. I haven't had my question answered yet. Are data centers industrial or commercial? I don't know. But that would be spread out across all those customers. And so the PSC actually needs language, statutory language that they can utilize in their rate making processes. And so our bill gives them that language, and the PSC has said, this is language we can use. Unfortunately, the Republican bill just offers vague language that says the PSC should keep customer costs contained. They can't use that. And in their own testimony, they said, this language does not work with our regulatory schemes. And we are afraid that we would be in litigation for years if this passed into law, because it's actually counter to and does not fit with current existing law. So that's the main rub. We have all kinds of other things in our bill. The Republican bill has all kinds of other things. But the core issue, if we want to protect the public on just the issue of rates, I think there's other ways that we need to protect the public. But if we want to focus on that, which I think is most pressing, we need to get it right so that the PSC can actually implement the policy toward the goal of protecting the public.
Okay, so it seems like Republicans and Democrats, in fact, some Democrats voted, not that many, but some Democrats voted for the Republican bill. It seems like there is a similar objective between the two parties on this. Do you see the possibility of cooperation, a compromise?
I mean, I'll say there's always a possibility, but there just hasn't been an interest to go from concept to actual policy. And so their bill has only a concept. And when we debated this on the floor, we offered an amendment. Just take the language from our bill. Fine. You don't like unions. Renewable energy is a sticking point. You're not a fan of that. The other transparency measures we have, if you don't want those, that's fine. Just please take the language that the PSC has said they can utilize to contain rates and put that in your bill. And they rejected that amendment. So I don't really understand why, if the goal is to protect ratepayers, you would reject the mechanism that would do that. according to the PSC, again, this isn't the Democrats saying this is the way to do it. This is the experts. Citizens Utility Board and the PSC said that the language we have is the only way to do it. So I'm not sure why they rejected that.
Okay, so are Democrats in the Assembly and in the Senate against data centers or for data centers or for data centers under certain conditions, or how would you sum it up?
I mean, I would say that it's not really our decision should Mount Pleasant or anybody else, Port Washington, have a data center. It's really, we need to have a regulatory framework that provides certainty and that protects the public. And so, if my community wants a data center, I think they should be able to use their local government process to make that happen. If some other community in Wisconsin wants to have one, I think they should have the opportunity to do that. But we need to make sure that we're protecting the public. That's our goal in the legislature. And especially, we pass tax incentives to stimulate this industry. And if we're going to do that, and we're going to stimulate an industry, we have a job to protect the public. I think that's pretty basic. And it's such a disappointment that we're not there.
Okay, let's go to Ted Neitzke, the mayor of Port Washington. Why don't we tell us what the status of the data center development in Port Washington is, and then I can ask you some more questions about your view of the legislation and whatnot. What's the status of things in Port Washington with the data center?
Yeah, so they are under construction. Vantage Corporation, with their partners Oracle and OpenAI, started the second week of December, and a month later, they are. There's a lot of movement out there. Anyone driving on I-43 north of Milwaukee or south from Green Bay who passes Port Washington sees a significant amount of earthwork and infrastructure being put in there, and it's having a significant impact in our community economically, and it's well underway. That's the best way I could describe it.
Okay, so it was quite a journey, I guess, to get there. And so, could you have used state help? Could you have used state legislation to help you through that effort?
I think what's interesting with that, and that's a great question, for us as a city, working with the state and local economic development corporations, we did not necessarily need any statutory guidelines to support this project. We locally put in place environmental expectations, developed a very aggressive zoning code, and in our developers agreement, took care of many of the environmental issues. Our community, through the process, came in and testified in our open sessions on many of the wonders or worries that they had, and we addressed most of them, if not all of them, in locally. Water usage, the things that we could control. We can't control power, but we do sell the water, and we found a corporation here that's going to use just over 20,000 gallons of water a day, which is the equivalent of 60 residences. It's 0.1% of the amount of water that we clean and produce each day in our city. So many of those concerns we discussed and mitigated them up front. And as far as could we have used help from the state? I think having the guardrails in place as we're developing developers agreements, and companies from outside of our state are coming to us to determine what's a good placement, what's a good fit statewide, locally. I think guidelines would be helpful for them on their development end. But as far as the city, we were very active and aggressive locally on what we would put in place, and we're pretty proud of that.
Okay, well, do you have a favorite bill in the legislature that should pass, or it really doesn't matter to you at this point?
As far as for what it does for Port Washington, and I think the representative pointed out, both bills have good pieces. If those bills were to be passed, Port Washington would be in compliance with all but one piece, which would be the component where renewable energy has to be on the site. But they have the land for it, so. Really, like I said, as far as the city of Port Washington is concerned, the state legislation's impact, we would be in compliance and ready to go.
Okay, so why did you, as the mayor, like the idea of having the data center in Port Washington?
Well, Port Washington is a classic story of most small cities in Wisconsin, especially southeastern Wisconsin. We used to have a very proud manufacturing heritage here. And when I was a young man growing up, we had Simplicity Manufacturing, Bolin's Manufacturing. We had everything here, the supply chain all the way up. We were a self-contained city, and that all died at the turn of the century, gone. 80% of our tax base right now is on homeowners and residents, and small cities in Wisconsin. If you don't have significant net new construction, you cannot keep up with your costs. So the opportunity for a city is either to ripen or rot. And we were looking through our strategic plan for some sort of a development within the city of Port Washington that was a significant industrial development to offset those costs, to our property taxpayers be able to invest in our infrastructure and sustain who we are as a city. Because for the last 40 years, we have had to kick all of our infrastructural costs, kick them down the road. So when we were approached with this idea through the state and the local economic development corporations, we explored it. We did our diligence, and frankly, this is the type of industrial development that a community like Port Washington benefits from, because there was no need for clean air credits, no significant disruption to our interstate or traffic. Once it's up and running, creates nearly 1,000 jobs that are six-figure plus paying jobs. And it elevates everything from our public schools to our infrastructure to the region to the county. That's hard to say no to. The road to get to it wasn't always easy, but at the end of the day, through patience and diligence, I think that the city of Port Washington could be a real prime example of local negotiations, strong practices, good developers agreements, and great zoning codes and our local laws to ensure that our citizens were protected, because there is no financial risk for the residents of our city.
Okay, so you allude to this, Mr. Mayor, but there's intense local opposition. There was some intense local opposition in your community, and in some of these communities where the data center developers are having to adjust their plans or withdraw their plans. I guess we've seen that several times in the state so far. So, do the opponents have legitimate concerns, and how did you answer them?
Well, we answered every concern legitimately. If you go into the chat, you'll see that we actually designed and developed a Q&A FAQ piece. So every time we had concerns come to us that we could control, things within our purview, we did. We had everybody in our council meetings, from the energy corporations to, we met with the American Bird Conservation groups. We built into our zoning codes everything that we could control locally. And, we were averaging between 15, 25 people at our council meetings who were coming in with concerns, who lived in that area. And in September, we had a social media influencer impact it. And that's when it shifted. And the intense local pieces that I see here, and when I talk to my colleagues around the state, it's not all local. It's regional and statewide. People who come very concerned about what we're doing and what is going on without doing the diligence of getting the answers. I mean, Jason at the top of the discussion here with the context and what we used to do compared to what we will do and what we do. The state used a lot more water and a lot more energy in the times past, as did our city. And again, we addressed everything that we could control. And our council, our commissions, this passed unanimously at every level and through the diligence. And I even flew out and visited the most modern data centers in the United States. And when I was there, compared to what I saw, smelled, and felt versus what you see on Google when you research these things, there's a gigantic disconnect here. And I think that data center companies and corporations in general need to do a better job of explaining what it is that goes on in these data centers, because they are just large computer warehouses that use a lot of energy. And what I like about the legislation is protecting through, statute, the costs onto the local users.
Okay, well, that's a good segue to introduce Tricia Braun. She's the executive director of the Wisconsin Data Center Coalition. Why don't you just tell us a little bit, Tricia, first, who is part of this coalition, and why does there need to be a coalition?
No, absolutely. And thank you for having me on. It's It's an interesting perspective coming from the coalition that really doesn't get much attention that we're trying to kind of bring more awareness to. And that's really that economic development piece that spreads beyond where the project is going to go. And the mayor said it perfectly. It's not just the community in that example with Vantage, it's not just Port Washington, but the state of Wisconsin has an opportunity to be a significant player in the supply chain of these data centers, both from the construction side, but also the operational side, which was really the impetus to the coalition. Exactly 6 months ago today, we formed a 501c6, which was led by a couple of companies and leaders in manufacturing and logistics that had opportunities and were working on hyperscale campuses in another state. What they were seeing was a lot of companies that do the same things that Wisconsin manufacturers do and make chillers, generators, switchgear, air handling units, and then trickling down into the tier 2, tier 3 metal fabricators, designers, and that's just scratching the surface. That doesn't even get to the construction side of things with the mechanical and the electrical and general contracting talent that we have here. But because there hadn't been up until Microsoft a project in Wisconsin, it really wasn't giving these companies the, I guess, the opportunity, the exposure to these projects. And so that was where it was really understanding that there's a probably, whoever has their magic 8 ball out, a 5 to 10 year window to really take advantage of what needs to be built from a data center, technology, storage, whatever you want to call it, infrastructure in the United States. And Wisconsin wasn't helping to get its manufacturers into these opportunities now, we may miss the boat. And so it's truly about the coalition is focused on engaging, educating manufacturers across the state of Wisconsin that have the opportunity and the ability to play in this space, promoting Wisconsin, promoting our supply chain. And now, as you can imagine, recently we've become more of that education advocacy voice for the industry itself.
Okay, so who are some of your members? The data center developers, utilities, like
No,
that?
actually, as of right now, it's predominantly all manufacturers with the addition of some utilities. So like the Alliance, the WECs, Dairyland Power, for example, ATC. Otherwise, it's you can go on the coalition's website, widcc.com, and see it's predominantly manufacturers. You've heard of like the trains and Mayville Engineering, some of those kind of tier one suppliers. But there's a lot of other smaller companies that are located across the state of Wisconsin. An example, Switchgear Power Systems. They're located outside of Sheboygan, 400 employees in a smaller town. 125 of their employees are 100% data center driven. So like these examples, and that's just one company. There's hundreds in Wisconsin.
So what's the big promise here? Is it construction jobs plus keeping the data center running jobs? I mean, what are the total number of jobs that could happen? Is that really that important of a driver in the overall state economy?
I think you have to look at the multiplier for it. Obviously, there's no promise except for a recognition that this is an opportunity that, some of the members that have already come forward have said, this is game changing for our company. This is, keeping us from laying off and other divisions that may not be doing so well because of where other industry segments are in Wisconsin that have traditionally kind of driven our economy. But a data center itself, the construction of it, a typical good manufacturing job, and putting my economic development hat on, a good manufacturing company or project brings a multiplier effect of like 3 to 4. Like that's really good. For every job they create, you can expect a direct and indirect a multiplier of 3 to 4. A data center has like 7.4 is what the PwC report that came out in 25 reported. And that doesn't include the construction jobs, which are tens of thousands. And I think Port Washington is probably seeing some of that activity right now. And then after the data centers up and operating, they have their core employees, which can be, whether it's in a large scale project, 500 to 1,000, there's likely 2 to 3 times that with other service providers, especially your mechanical, your facilities maintenance, your electrical, that will never leave the project itself. So the impact to the economy, local and broader within Wisconsin, is pretty significant.
Is there a dollar amount on the impact?
I have it right here. Just looking at a typical hyperscale like you're looking at, and lean to Mayor Ted to keep me honest on this, because they've done a lot of research most recently. Operationally, 45 million in local economic impact, not including the tax revenues, 547 average jobs, permanent jobs across that.
Is that per data center?
Per project, yes, per hyperscale project, correct. Yes, 2.5 billion in economic impact during construction alone.
Okay, so you're up against you and those who favor data centers are up against Charlie Barron's, for instance, and and a lot some intense local opposition.
Yeah.
How are you treating their concerns?
We're trying to take the high road, and it's hard sometimes to not do that, but fight fear with facts, I guess is a good way to put it, and start really just underscoring the things that, with these data center projects, especially because they're closed loop, the ones that are, for example, I think QTS made the comment, I can't speak for all of them, they haven't built an evaporative system data center since 2018. So all of these modern facilities are using that closed loop. So using that water usage similar to what Port Washington had cited. With the environmental, same, like I visited the one of the older data center campuses in Richmond, Virginia, and it was quiet. It was beautifully landscaped. It was secure. There was like mature trees and waterways surrounding it. It wasn't an eyesore. And I'm a huge manufacturing proponent. I think most of us in Wisconsin appreciate our manufacturing roots and what it has provided and afforded Wisconsin historically. And and I can honestly say these are not as impactful as some of the manufacturing projects that we are really proud of having.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Representative Stroud now. Part of your coalition for the bill, I think, are environmentalists. Yeah, I've talked to some environmentalists who are very concerned. They think these bills don't even come close to adequately uh, handling all the concerns. They cite the water. They use among their top concerns. And on top of that, driving, energy use, and in the interim, fossil fuels driving the energy, um, the power for these. How do you answer the environmentalist concerns? I mean, you come from Ashland. I mean, I think a lot of your constituency probably fits into that category.
Yeah, it does. And it's a very important question. So I have felt really satisfied by the answers around water. I appreciate that we always want to protect water first in this state, and I think that that's a great identity that we should never let go of. But my reading of this issue is that the place where we need to be most attentive is with energy. And it's not just because we're scaling up. And as I said before, the way utility law works, that exposes everybody to risk. But it's also in our state currently, 60% of our energy production is coal and natural gas. And, yes, natural gas is some improvement on coal, but if you look at total greenhouse gas effects over the life course of natural gas, and I'm talking about from the fracking to the burning to the methane leaks, it's still very concerning as an energy source. So if we're going to double our energy use as a state, and we're still going to have such a small percentage of that be renewables, that's really not where we want to be in 2026, knowing what we know about the effects of burning carbon on climate. But this could be a huge opportunity. As was just discussed, the economic opportunities here are enormous if we do it right. So using this moment with some of the wealthiest companies in the history of the world to help expand our renewable grid to the benefit of the public is something we should really be looking at. And I'm not talking just, I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle said, oh, you just want solar farms in other parts of the state. I'd like them to know that in the year 2026, we can really think differently and more dynamically about renewable energy. And this could be a moment to do that. And it would be a huge economic benefit. It would be a huge benefit to ratepayers, to climate. But we've got to really start to think about what are the pinch points for expanding renewables in our state. If you compare us to other states, we are way behind. And there are reasons for that I think that we can address. And it's critical. We can't treat this as an afterthought. We can't think, in this moment we have economic opportunity and we'll deal with the climate effects in 10 years. That's not how climate works. We need to be thinking about it at the same time, and we need to be really smart about how we do it. And if I could just go back to this economic opportunity thing, the bill that we debated last week, 840, because of what the PSC said, if we don't get this right with the language we put into law, we could have all existing projects ground to a halt and stuck in litigation, meaning all of this economic opportunity that was just talked about, the multiplier effects, could be on pause if we passed a bill that actually contradicts current existing statute and means we are now in litigation over every single data center project in the state. And so this, I know it's so easy to see every debate that we have in Madison as just partisan. I would say in this debate, it's not really just partisan. It's like one idea that's ready to be implemented and another idea that's not even fleshed out. And so we were trying to avoid the unfleshed out idea making it past the assembly in those debates.
Okay, I want to get the rest of the panel talking about that, our energy split here, where the power comes from. More than 50% does come from fossil fuels. So, what about, I guess I would call it a challenge from Representative Stroud is let's use this as an opportunity to boost renewables, except, the bill that passed the assembly actually says that the renewables for that have to be on site. So let's just talk about that issue. Is this such an opportunity? Do renewables have to be boosted in order so the data centers flourish? Who wants to take a stab at that?
Well, if I can start, I mean, for us, for our project with Vantage and Oracle and OpenAI, they built into their energy agreements that the energy produced for the site had to be 70% renewable for the site. And what I think is interesting about that is, again, in the absence of the statute for now, the company is driving where the energy is going to be produced from We Energies. And those were agreements that were put in up front. So I think there's a unique two-way piece that can come here where as far as what the state does for guidelines and expectations, but then the capitalist nature of the market is also driving these companies recognize that they cannot sustain with the current power infrastructure. So they are putting positive pressure, into our local power producers to ensure that it is disruptive. And as the representative had said, I think that's a really unique time period we are in where businesses are saying you have to shift because we have a core value of being environmentally, conscious, and they strongly value that.
Okay, well, let's hear from Tricia and then Jason on this.
Well, I don't think anyone disagrees, whether you're a data center user or the utility, that this is a time really to start really looking at more efficient technologies, whether it's the small modular reactors that could be on site or nuclear. But to Mayor Ted's points, the owners are very interested in all of the renewable sources. They want to be sustainable partners. They want to help elevate this. In some of these cases, it's our own bureaucracy that's slowing this down. From my understanding, and I by no means am the technical expert to talk about the how or the why on some of this, the power gen and power supply. But I do think that that's really the opportunity that we're all looking at right now is how to do that more efficiently.
So, Tricia, did the coalition back either assembly bill?
No. We registered, I believe, as other, with the intention to be a resource for conversation and to bring, people together to weigh on the opinions. And to the point, most of the items that are in the bill are already being done. That portion of having the renewables on site from a feasibility perspective is the question on whether or not that makes sense.
Okay, and before I ask Jason to weigh in, folks who are listening in and viewing, if you have a question, you feel free to type it into the chat or the Q&A, and I will start reviewing those. Jason, what about these issues? What about the renewable power issue and where the energy comes from to power the huge demand of the data centers?
Yeah, and I'm also not presenting myself as a utilities expert or an attorney, but I think the representative correctly identified the power as one of the main issues here before us. And I think it is worth noting that, prior to this situation, just a few years ago, we were in a falling usage environment. And that is also not, I mean, it's great from an environmental standpoint, from a standpoint of maintaining your grid and maintaining your rates and doing your investments you need. That's also, whether it's for water or power, not exactly ideal if you're the one actually running the utility. So I think we can see this investment, this generational investment, as an opportunity to put renewables into the grid, to put reliability into the grid, to experiment with smaller generation, if it's natural gas fired, smaller generation units than we would typically use. A lot of, innovative things can be tried, but I think we need to get both the regulatory frame and the technology frame correct. And it is worth having a hopefully productive and cordial but intense debate about what the best path forward is for that. And we will be a couple of things on the forum. One, our annual meeting on February 3rd in downtown Milwaukee, the evening. People can still register for that. We'll be on data centers, and there'll be a discussion there of some of these issues. And then also we'll be doing more from the local community standpoint, but research in the spring and into the early summer that will look at some of these issues, and we hope to illuminate them.
Right. So you have a February 3rd event in Milwaukee, a panel discussion with different actors than we have here today. Just so you know, a reminder that the Washington Data Center FAQ, which some people aren't seeing in the chat, is available. Go to portdatacenter.com/news-updates. Okay, let's go to some questions here, and then I'll probably finish it off with some other questions. But there's a question from an attendee. Can the panelists also comment on the recent bill introduced that would ban data centers from using NDAs? Mayor Neitzke, did you folks use an NDA, and why, and should there be a ban on such things?
So we did not. We made it very clear right up front that we would not do that. We had a prior experience where we were asked to sign an NDA for a potential development, and the majority of the council, as well as myself, didn't really feel comfortable with it. And so when we began the discussions on this project, we told the developer right up front we would not sign a non-disclosure agreement, that we would lean into our local ordinances that would hold people accountable for that. I think it's very difficult in the 21st century with a lot of major developers looking to see where they want to land for them not to use NDAs. But I think, locally, if you've got the courage and you push back and say, listen, we're just not going to do it, they will find a way to operate without having to sign an NDA. So we did not, and we will not.
Okay, Tricia, Braun from the Wisconsin Data Center Coalition, are NDAs, the use of NDAs, bad practice, good practice?
I think there's two different ways to look at this. From an economic development standpoint, we being practitioners are very accustomed to projects being under NDA. When a company is doing a site selection process, it's very important to them to be kind of under the radar, both from a competitive standpoint, but also a negotiation standpoint as they're looking at where to land. When it comes to data centers, you get a mix of both, where Mayor Ted and even QTS did not have an NDA, and they were very kind of open about what they were going to do with the project and communicating it. And other instances where it's a single tenant potentially, where they maybe can't, maybe it's to their shareholders, or it's a publicly traded company. There could be different nuances that would impact whether or not the project needs to be under NDA. But I think that varies, and if there's legislation decides that that's required, then that's what it'll be, and they'll understand that, and they just may or may not choose to look at Wisconsin if that's the case.
Let's go to Representative Stroud on that. Do you support that bill? Do you think it has a chance?
I'm taking a close look at it, and I would love to have further conversation with experts on economic development to see in what ways could we do it such that it's still possible to strike that balance of protecting the public and making sure that local communities have the ability to have a voice on the things that affect them. I just really believe in that. But I also recognize that there are real economic realities that we'd have to kind of try to work through. My first reaction when I heard about NDAs that's close to me in Hermantown, Minnesota, close to Superior, as an elected official, to me, it just felt shocking that you would keep something from the public that affects them directly. Just it rubs me the wrong way. But I'm willing to be open-minded about like how is it important, but might there be some limitations? Again, especially when we're offering tax dollars for these projects. It's interesting when we allow the public to pay for things. And of course we get benefits. I'm not dismissing that. But it seems like people should make sure they have a right to have a say about the things that affect them.
Jason, you need to weigh in on that, or are you okay?
I'd just say, I mean, in general, the forum likes to see as much transparency as possible for projects like this, and that's part of how we do our work. I mean, how I'm going to do our study, looking at data centers and local impacts is we're going to look at the documents that have been released by local, in part by local communities, and so having access to that will be important for our work. That being said, I do think it's important to put the context that there are many commercial developments that both state and local actors have confidentiality in the early stages. And if there is as long as there's an opportunity for the public to fully learn what's happening at some point and get enough time to deliberate and go through it, because these things are very complex, then that is something that happens with other projects as well. So you want to at least provide the context that it's not just data centers that are operating this way.
Okay, here's a question. Let's talk about, and I don't know the site here. What legislative steps would you recommend to increase renewables to power data centers? So this questioner is suggesting developing administrative code to clarify solar as the administrative code does for wind. I'm not sure I understand that, but maybe let's just answer what legislative steps would you recommend to increase renewables, Representative Straub?
Well, interestingly, we debated the data center bill on one day last week, and then the next week we had the nuclear energy bill, which there were elements of that bill that kind of show some possibilities of how we could look to a future. And if data centers themselves start to be the major investors of expanding our energy grid, might they be interested in helping to expand even home solar, home batteries, maybe tying into making that more possible so that we can reduce the household energy use? And you might think, surely that's not enough for a data center, really? But when you understand how utilities operate, we have to overbuild our grid because we have these peak moments of use. And the household is actually, we bank a lot of energy because we know people are going to use it at the same time. But with solar and batteries, we could completely change the game when it comes to how energy is distributed on the grid. To do that, though, we're going to need an enhanced regulatory approach, but also an investment. And so, again, this is where I think this could be a huge opportunity. And there's a lot of conversation happening around these sorts of really exciting possibilities. And I look forward to having more conversations with the players involved to see what might be possible.
Okay, so here's a you want to say something, Jason?
Just very quickly, I was going to say, I think one of your policies, if you were trying to maximize renewable generation that you would not put in place, is the requirement that the renewables be generated on the site of the data center. There may be other reasons why you may want to minimize impact to other land parcels, or or maybe you want to minimize transmission assets that have to be built. There might be reasons why you do, but if your only concern was to maximize the amount of renewables you had, then you're limiting that, I think, by limiting the areas where the renewables can be placed.
Well, that is a sticking point. I think that is one of the reasons that Democrats are saying that, as written, Evers would probably not sign this bill. I think that's one of the major sticking points. And I think we talked a little bit about that before. So this one's for Mayor Neitzke. You can't believe this, that there's a critic out there, Mr. Mayor. So, real estate numbers for Ozaukee County are in. All towns except Port Washington saw growth. Port Washington was down 3.7%. This loss was last year when data centers had to be disclosed in order to get 170. I don't know. This critic is saying that their property values are going to go down as a result of the data centers.
That's the exact opposite of what's actually happening in the city of Port Washington. This data center is located northwest of the traditional city of Port Washington. We are seeing requests for development here, residential condos, apartments at a record pace for our city. And anyone who lives here knows that their assessments went up. And if you go onto any real estate website and search for a home in Port Washington, you're not going to find many. Ozaukee County is a desirable place in the state of Wisconsin. It's one of the, I know this is statewide, but it's one of the most beautiful counties in the state. We have so much to offer, and this is a highly desired area. So when you're comparing us up against Cedarburg's, Mequon's, and Grafton's, who are also experiencing significant growth, those percentages can be read multiple ways. I'm sure Jason can do a better job explaining the poli sci behind all of it all. But at the end of the day, that is not the reality of what's going on the ground here in Port Washington.
Yeah, I could just say I did see this question in the
Hey,
chat.
Jason, speak up a bit, will you?
Yeah, of course. I did see this question in the chat, and I looked at our property values and taxes tool, which anybody can look at for free on our website. And it does have equalized property values that get reported by the State Department of Revenue for every community in the state. And for Port Washington, in the most recent year, equalized property values went up by 10.5%, which is in the neighborhood of what you're seeing in the southeast Wisconsin region, not radically different. So I can't speak to how a data center might impact an individual homeowner's property values, but at least for the most recent year, pretty robust double-digit property value increase in that community.
All right, well, here's another local tax question. I'll stay with you two right now. Mr. Mayor, you've gotten some grief for the TID funding and how you will get tax levy benefit out of your project without raising taxes on current taxpayers. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Well, we did two things in our developers agreement. One was I think we took a very aggressive approach in our TID. So it's a $15 billion project with a maximum of about $490 million in that TID. However, what we did is we negotiated up front that we needed to see immediate economic impact for our community, and recognizing that net new construction in a TID takes some time to go on to the tax rolls with the increment. What we did was we agreed that the land value before it was developed would be immediately put into on January 2027 would be put into our our valuation for a city. So over 120 million new dollars in valuation will be put onto our tax rolls next year against taxation. That Vantage will begin paying property taxes immediately. The second part of that is we are looking over time here. The way the current state statute is a community like Port Washington gets penalized when we look to develop and have this much new valuation come into our city. So we're currently worth just about $2 billion. This could bring us up to $10 billion. And the way the statute is currently, we have to capture that valuation, that net new construction valuation, within 60 months of it being assessed. That's unfair to small communities like Port Washington, and we are looking for legislative support to change the statute for us and other communities who are, living through a renaissance of industry again. And if we want them to be able to come to our communities, it cannot be on the shoulders of our local taxpayers. And I'm gonna fight like hell to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay, Tricia, I'm wondering whether the some of these agreements that the mayor references could be pattern agreements for all data centers. Like here's like a base, you must commit to these things. That would help out if you were in a city that or a town that didn't have adequate staff.
Yeah.
It could be intimidating negotiating with a big company. I'm just
I
musing
would
about
say
that.
so coincidentally, Jeff, I'm actually in a hotel room at the Wisconsin's Economic Development Association conference where, that truly is part of that organization is helping each other that are, working through projects that they've not had to have before. Port Washington had the benefit of a very strong economic development partner in M7, who obviously had worked closely with Mount Pleasant with the Microsoft project. And in turn, other communities such as Beaver Dam are also kind of all learning from each other to put best practices in place. So I think that's happening, Jeff. And as these become more sophisticated and the more everything gets better each time you do it, right? And that's truly one of the goals.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to raise your hands if you think that there's going to be a compromise bill passed the legislature and be signed by Governor Evers in this current session. Who thinks that's going to happen? Well, okay.
It's
I
not really
see no
within my
indication.
control.
No, but
Yeah.
I mean, so Representative Stroud, explain that if you can quickly, and then we'll go into your final thoughts because we're coming up on the end.
I mean,
Why can't, if this is such a paramount concern, why can't the legislature agree on something that the governor can sign?
I'm pretty new. This is my first term, so I am as shocked as you are that when things are important to the voters, it's not the biggest priority in this building, unfortunately. I don't understand why we wouldn't figure out a compromise, but I can tell you that so far there's seemed to be zero interest in actually working something out. And I think it's the voters who are harmed by that. I think there's way too much calculation about elections and not enough calculation about what the public needs to be protected.
Okay, well, let's just have some closing thoughts. Jason, what's your analysis of why there probably won't be a compromise bill signed by Evers?
I mean, I still think there's a pretty decent chance that happens. I will say, um, I, I think the public is very skeptical of these data centers. And I think to some degree, I think it would be helpful if people set aside how they feel about data centers and AI in general, and how they felt about AI, and what they might want Congress to do about AI, and just the
Mhm.
question of, okay, we're going to have, Chat GPT is probably not going away. So part of the question is, do we want our state to have a part of the economic activity from that, right? And I think it's probably good to separate those two questions, but I don't actually see that in the minds of the public, that's probably going to happen.
Okay, Mayor Neitzke, your closing thoughts.
Yeah. So I was a history teacher, and I get very nervous when we race to legislation without really truly understanding what's going on. And what I would ask for is a bipartisan coalition to go put their eyes on what modern data centers look like. Again, we're working off of lagging data that's big and scary. They used to use evaporating systems and waste lots of energies, and they used to. And sitting in my office here, I'm looking at a WE Energy's power plant that, when I was a child, was a coal power plant that every kid got very excited about going and watching the coal boats unload, and now it's a gas-fired power plant. We would never compare that efficiencies of what that does now to what it used to. So I would ask, as we're looking for legislation on environmental pieces, et cetera, that we really weigh out all the consequences to ensure that our state is competitive in the future. Because Port Washington, we weren't sitting here with nine choices. We didn't have, Honda Motor Company saying we would like to build a plant here, or we didn't have, a major brewery. We didn't have a lot of options. The second half of the 21st century economy is going to be digitally driven, and this is our current revolution. And the state, I think, needs to do what we did. We went to Virginia, we looked at all these things, and I think legislators need to go put their eyes on them so that we can all do a better job explaining what exactly they are. Because they, again, if you just use the internet as your source, they seem scary, and they're not. And legislation would be great for the guardrails, especially environmental and power.
Okay, Tricia?
I 100% agree with the mayor on that. And I think Wisconsin, and one of the reasons that we love this state is we're really good about finding solutions, being creative, creating new technologies, being leaders in transformative applications of different, whether it's manufacturing or kind of just pushing the edge on that. So we have a lot of people that could be great subject matter experts, whether it's members of the Wisconsin Data Center Coalition or it's people at our universities, throughout the state, not even just Madison, but beyond that, bringing those minds together could be very powerful. I guess that's where I would push for those next conversations to bring in the people that are already in the space and seeing this and living this every day.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to thank our panelists. I think we had a great conversation here. Again, audience, note that there is the February 3rd Wisconsin Policy Forum event in Milwaukee. Then there's the February 5th WisPolitics, WisBusiness, Wisconsin Technology Council event on February 5th in Madison. And I want to thank our sponsors, of course, for helping make this happen. HBS Wisconsin, American Family Insurance, the Wisconsin Hospital Association, Xcel Energy, Walmart, and WEC Energy Group. Thank you very much, everyone, including the audience, and we'll see you next time.